Living in Canada, we sometimes face severe challenges in living out our Christian faith, but compared to what takes place in other countries around the world, we have much to be thankful for. Today, we're going to hear some of the stories of Christians going through extreme difficulty, and we'll also hear how we can help out. Joining me now from St. Albert, Alberta, is Greg Musselman, spokesperson for Voice of the Martyrs. Greg, welcome back to BCN.
Hey, it's good to be with you again.
Greg, let's talk about the persecution of Christians in Pakistan. How bad is it there right now for believers?
Well, it's extremely difficult. Now, it all depends on what area of the country that you live in. In some of the rural areas, it's very dangerous. And even in some of the city areas like Lahore, where I've been several times, where churches are attacked and, Christians are, arrested. One of the things, Hal, that goes on is this blasphemy law. And often it's used against Christians. There's less than 2% of the population of Pakistan is Christian. Majority, of course, is Muslim. It's the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. So it's very difficult for Christians there. And anytime there's like a land grab kind of situation, Christians will be accused of blasphemy. They're put in prison. Of course, we all know the story of Bibi, who spent many years in prison in Pakistan. Of course, now she's here in Canada. But Asiya is here and in freedom finally after all that time in prison. Many of our brothers and sisters in Christ are suffering. Now, this past weekend, I was up in Sioux Lookout, Ontario, and I met several families there. And one of the men that I talked to, he actually was going to be arrested for blasphemy. He was fortunate enough to escape the country, did spend several years in a detention center in Bangkok, Thailand, but now he's in Canada. And he was sharing with me over the weekend about how his cousin, who is a young guy, he's got several children, and he's married, and he was put in prison for blasphemy. And he's very concerned. We're going to try to find out ways, to be able to maybe be in touch with this young man and encourage him. But they live with this every day. There's, again, there's not only the attacks that we hear when explosions take place in churches, many killed, but, also just the everyday living in a culture that, for the most part, is against the people that follow Jesus.
Are there some areas of Pakistan that are more free than others, or is it basically dangerous everywhere throughout the country?
Well, there's pockets. I mean, you can be in a big city like Lahore, Karachi, some of those spots, and in some neighborhoods, there's relatively no violence. But one of the things that the believers that I talked to on the weekend said is, yeah, things can be going along, but there's always that potential of things happening. In rural areas, where the Christians are often forced, to be involved in the brick kilns, even the young children, to the adults, they're under severe persecution. They're forced into this slave labor. And, so again, as you go through the country, and it's a fairly large country, a very broken country politically and otherwise, is the challenge, though, for the Christians is that they just don't know when things could happen. One of the families that I was privileged to be sort of the go-between, I was contacted on Facebook by this brother named Saran. And, he told me of his situation, and he was at that point in these detention centers in Thailand. And I said, well, why did you leave the country? Because one of the things that with Voice of the Martyrs is we really encourage the Christians to stay in the country, because if everybody leaves, where's the salt and light and to be able to share the message of Jesus? And I understand that, from a Voice of the Martyrs perspective. But as a dad, knowing that this, Saran and his wife, Charmine, have two young daughters, and because they were involved with a Christian school in their area, that one day a militant Islamist came up to the door and said, if you don't stop, we're going to kidnap your daughter. And that for them was the last straw. They packed up their bags with some help from friends. They made their way to Thailand, and I mean, that it was an ordeal in itself, but at least they escaped the country. So, I mean, this is the situation facing Christians all the time. And, you're in a church on a Sunday morning. You and I don't have to worry about a bomb exploding, but that is the pressure that they're living under there.
Is the Christian church shrinking in numbers with all of this persecution, Greg?
Well, that's hard to know, Hal, because we know that thousands, as an example, have left Pakistan for countries like Thailand, some in Malaysia, and then making their way to Canada, the United States, Australia, and some of those other places. But definitely the message of the gospel is going forward. And, we work in Pakistan. I've had the opportunity of, teaching at the Bible College and documenting stories of persecution. But the thing that's quite interesting is, okay, you would have those that maybe have a long history. Their grandparents were Christians and their parents were Christians. They're Christians now, and they're leaving the country. On the other hand, many of the people that I've talked to and that we work with are Muslim background people. They've had dreams and visions of Jesus, or somebody has shared the message of God's love with them. There's through radio and television. Even programs like 100 Huntley Street that I'm involved in, stories go into these places and they're able to hear the message of the gospel, because we have people here in Canada that have converted from Islam into Christianity, and they're sharing their stories. So we know that the message is getting out there. And, to answer your question, is it in big numbers? Well, it's hard to know, because many of these Muslim converts have to be very careful. They don't want their neighbors, their friends, their imam finding out that they've converted from Islam to Christianity. So a lot of them have to be, in secret, and have to be very careful.
So the Christians in these volatile countries where they're being persecuted, are they somehow able to extend forgiveness to those who are persecuting them?
That is one of the things that is amazing to me, whether it's Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, or Indonesia, wherever we have traveled, and I've met believers, Ethiopia. And, you hear the stories, the horrible things that have happened, like in Nigeria, there's thousands and thousands of widows, Christian, families where the husband has been killed. Some of the children have been killed. And, as I'm doing the interviews, and then I come to that part of the, where I ask the question, okay, these horrible things have happened. I understand how you would be angry, and maybe you'd say, I don't want to forgive. I'll ask the question, have you been able to forgive? And as long as there's been some time passed, because, they're human just like us, not superhuman Christians. It takes time to process that. But they go back to what Jesus says, to love your enemies, to forgive those that have persecuted you. And so, in most of the time, the people we've talked to in the interviews have said yes, because Jesus has said that we forgive, and we are going to do that. Again, with everybody, it could be a long period of time. I've talked to, a lady, in the Palestinian Authority, in Gaza, where her husband, who worked in the Bible Society, he was murdered. And it took many years before she was finally able to forgive. And then once she was able to forgive, then the Lord opened up doors of ministry. So you know what? I would say most of the people that we've talked to, again, they've had a process to be able to work through it. In some cases, like in Pakistan, and talked to some of these young Christian girls that have been, sexually assaulted, and in some cases forced to marriage, convert to Islam, they've escaped. And you say, are you able to forgive? And sometimes they'll say, yeah, we've been able to forgive. Others are saying, I'm still in process. I know what the Bible teaches, but I'm still trying to work on it.
Now, Greg, you mentioned Aja Bibi earlier. Any update on how she's doing with her family, and maybe give our viewers a little bit of background on her story?
Well, Asia Bibi was arrested, more than 10 years ago. She was charged with blasphemy. She was working in a field with Muslim women. She's a Christian. And, she was having a drink of water, and she offered her cup to another person that was working, and they said, no, you're an infidel, and all that kind of thing. And it erupted into some argument. What was said, we're, not totally sure. Asia says she did not, blaspheme Muhammad or the Quran or Muslim people. She just merely stated her Christian beliefs, and for that, she was arrested, spent many years in jail. She was given the death sentence. It was overturned. And then, a year or so ago, she was told that she was, had been exonerated, and she was able to leave the country. That caused, the militant Islamists then to start getting all angry and protesting. And of course, the government was afraid that there'd be riots and people would be killed. Eventually, she was, able to get out of the country. She's in Canada now. I've only seen one interview that she's granted so far. It was in print. She's still fearful. She's here in Canada somewhere, and she's actually been reunited with her children, and we're thank the Lord for that. A lot of pressure was put on the government of Pakistan, including our Canadian government, and we're grateful for their getting involved and getting her released. She's now talking about at some point that she would like to go to Europe, but at least we know for now she's safe. And, just trying to recover, too. I mean, you can't imagine what she's been through. And she's grateful, though, and she says she misses Pakistan. And I think I would miss Canada if I was in another country as well. But even all that she went through, she knows that's probably never going to happen. But for now, she's safe.
The South American country, Colombia, is not usually a place thought of where Christians would be persecuted. But, Greg, that is definitely the case. Can you explain what's going on there?
Well, Hal, there was a time, 10, 15 years ago where the highest number of pastors being killed, for their faith was in Colombia. Now, we're familiar with a group called FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. They're a guerrilla organization. Trying to bring equality into society. Well, in order to fund what they were doing, they got into the drug trade. They also got into kidnappings, and they caused massive destruction in the country, controlling about a third of Colombia. Now, most of it was in the rural areas, and they destroyed all churches. Now, the reason that Christians were so persecuted is that the pastors were in their churches saying, you don't join these guys. They're killers, they're terrorists, they're involved in the drug trade, they're poisoning people. And so as a result of that, the FARC would then go after the pastors. They see them, of course, as the leaders. And the FARC and the paramilitary, which is on the right side, also involved in terrorism. And then you've got your military. Well, they work, under an army kind of scenario, military scenario. So they take out the general, would be the pastor of the church. So Christians have endured a lot. I mean, the country itself has been, a lot of warfare, a lot of death, but Christians particularly targeted. The people that we've been working with are like up in the Andes Mountains. These are indigenous believers. And the reason they suffer persecution is because you've got the communists, that kind of thing. You've got a mix of Catholicism and paganism. It's a mess. And so for those that say, you know what, I want to follow Jesus, they understand the message of the gospel, the good news, God sent his son into the earth, and they came in a relationship with him. And then as a result of that, when they read the Bible, they say we can't be participating in these kind of evil practices. So that gets them into trouble, and they are driven from their communities. When we were there just recently, I was down there with a team from 100 Huntley Street, and we went into the Andes Mountains and met with a number of believers that have been persecuted. A young lady there, at the time she was like 18 years old. Her name is Letty. And she was, beaten up by family members, which was terrible. And so we heard many stories like Letty's, her mom, and others that have suffered because of their Christian faith. So part of what we're doing, Voice of the Martyrs and Crossroads 100 Huntley Street, is actually to build a village from scratch. We've done it one other time in another part of the southern area of Colombia. And so we're helping these believers there. But they have these stories of the difficulties they've gone through. And we've talked to others that, if they've been, in part of the FARC and some other areas of Colombia, that they're often targeted because now they're seen as enemies.
Algeria is a country in North Africa located between Morocco and Libya. Now, that's also a country known to persecute Christians. Is a lot of that to do with the government and the culture there, Greg?
Yeah, and actually, and maybe you'll be able to even run this video that we've been able to, get from our friends in Algeria, is police officers actually went into a church, and it was one of the largest Protestant church, actually full gospel church in Algeria. And the police came in. Of course, everybody has got their cell phones and video, and they're videoing as the police officers, enter into this church of more than 800 people and say, you don't have authorization to be able to be meeting here and having worship services. And but the people were singing, they were worshiping the Lord. And then the pastor there, Sila, got up and said, to the police officers and the congregation, respectfully, he said, you know what, we are doing this because we have the right to be able to do this. And this is how we answer your, trying to close us down, as we worship and praise God. And Algeria is a country that is listed as more than 99% Muslim. And so there's not a lot of Christians in Algeria. And they've, up until recently, they've, had, relative freedom to be able to worship, but that has now changed. And so several of the churches, the larger churches, and we're not talking thousands and thousands, 800 being the largest one, is that they're being closed down, and the government says you're not allowed to meet. And, and the Christians are saying, well, yes, we are. And then what they do is they pour wax into the locks so they can't get into the building. But you and I know that, the church is not the building, it's the people. And, they're trying to show the love of Jesus, fighting back in prayer and trying to show love in the midst of the situations that they're going through. But I've been very impressed, what the reports I've had, and we work in that, northern part of Africa, is the response has been in a way that's not in a violent way or anything like that, but just saying, okay, we're going to worship our God, and they're just believing that the Lord is going to intervene. That's why we need to be praying.
Greg Musselman, spokesperson with Voice of the Martyrs, thanks so much for joining me today from St. Albert, Alberta.
Hey, Hal, always good to see you, and thanks for the opportunity.